Hello, everybody, and welcome to the executive meeting today. First thing I'd like to do is just record a couple of apologies. Quite a bit of illness going around. For those that have been here at previous meetings will know that the table is slightly depleted. So we've got apologies to record from Councillors Waller, Widdowson, De Gorn and Craghill. Welcome everybody else that's here joining us and those dialing in to speak to us later as well. The first agenda item is declarations of interest. So I'll give a couple of seconds in case colleagues want to declare anything. Councillor Runciman.
Please can I declare a non-pecuniary but personal interest in the item at agenda item 7, which is the York Minster Precinct Neighbourhood Plan, as I'm a member of the Minster community.
Thank you. Councillor Cuthbertson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I have a parallel declaration in that I'm also a member of the Minster community.
Thank you very much. I cannot see any others to declare, so thank you for that. That takes us straight through onto agenda item 2, which is the consideration of exclusion of the press and public. And this is to consider doing so regards Annex 2 to agenda item 6, the housing delivery programme update. And that's on the grounds that it contains information relating to the financial or business affairs of particular persons. Normally, when we get to that agenda item, we won't need to refer to the annex, so we won't need to exclude the press and public. But if I could just ask colleagues to agree to that in case we talk about the annex. So I'm seeing nods. Thank you very much. So clear consensus to agreeing that if we need to. That then takes us straight on to agenda item 3, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. And these are set out on pages 3 to 12. So again, I'll give a couple of seconds in case colleagues have any issues they'd like to raise with the minutes. If not, if I could ask you if I could accept those. So thank you very much. So again, a clear consensus. I shall sign the minutes of the last meeting, which then takes us straight through to public participation. And we've got 5 public participants today, 2 speaking jointly. Our first public participant is joining us via Zoom, Flick Williams, and that's a question to the executive member regards equality training and lifelong learning. And hopefully you can hear me, Flick, and you have 3 minutes to talk to us.
Good evening. Elected members. Questions for the Executive Member for Culture, Leisure and Communities. Last week, Councillor Fisher commented in the press that because he sees plenty of people in the centre in wheelchairs and on mobility scooters, he does not see a problem. He infers that blue badge holders enjoyed a privilege that has now been taken away and suggests this is the reason disabled people now complain of discrimination. Leaving aside the falsehood that previously we could park anywhere, his ignorance of the whole issue is just astounding in light of the many hours disabled people have spent explaining. So, as the portfolio holder for equalities, Councillor Smalley, I should like to know what you propose to do about this. Clearly, Councillor Fisher has no understanding of the legal concept of reasonable adjustment, nor the public sector equality duty. I suggest he is not alone and recommend urgent re-education on the Equalities Act. I believe he has breached the Local Government Association Councillor Code of Conduct. But as the complaints procedure is inaccessible and designed to get people to give up, I raise it here. I direct you to the section on victimisation, which states members must not promote negative stereotypes of groups with a protected characteristic. As someone who taught a course on stereotypes of disability in popular culture, allow me to enlighten you. The stereotype Councillor Fisher plays into is the one that holds Paralympians and says, look, they can make Herculean effort to overcome their impairment. If you can't, you are lesser, not worthy, not trying hard enough to beat the odds you were dealt. So tough, no inclusion for you. In so doing, he creates a hierarchy of impairment which the least disabled can be tolerated and those with the most complex access needs excluded, discarded and forgotten. I repeat, as many before, promoting stereotypical representations of any other group with a protected characteristic would be deemed so unacceptable, any councillor guilty of it would be run out of town. So as disabled people, we are again bottom of the pile against whom discrimination is deemed to be tolerated. Elsewhere on the agenda for this meeting,
You have 30 seconds.
There is a statement which says the council seeks to promote a culture of lifelong learning. So, Councillor Smalley, if you take your equalities brief seriously, you need to commission, as a matter of urgency, professional disability equality training for all members and officers in this council that is failing us.
Thank you very much for your comments that we will take into account as we go through the meeting. Our second registered public speaker today is Councillor Fenton, who is registered to speak on agenda item 6, Housing Delivery Programme Update, and that regards a discussion to be held by the Housing and Community Safety Policy and Scrutiny Committee at its meeting on the 15th of March. Hopefully it has been held. Councillor Fenton, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me, and thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. I'm speaking in 2 capacities. First, as Chair of the Council's Housing and Community Safety Policy and Scrutiny Committee, but I'm also speaking in a personal capacity. Members of the Scrutiny Committee met earlier this week to discuss the Housing Delivery Programme Update report, and it was agreed that I would feedback our comments on 2 particular aspects. Firstly, we discussed the proposed increase in the proportion of homes on the Burnholme and Duncan Barracks sites that will be classed as affordable. We would like to ask that consideration is given to actions that will maximise the chances of these properties being occupied by people who live or work in York, particularly key workers. We're aware of the exclusivity period during which key workers could express interest in properties on the Lowfield development, and this is perhaps something that could be considered for future developments as well. Secondly, members of the committee raised questions around the likely provision of electric vehicle charging points on future housing development sites. And whilst there was a recognition of the role that to be played by the hyper hub charging sites, members asked that opportunities for vehicle charging close to home are maximised. I'll now say a few words in a personal capacity, not wearing my committee chair hat. I'd like to thank officers and the executive member for taking on board relevant recommendations coming from the recent scrutiny report on affordable homes and new developments. And these included a recommendation that officers consider how the housing development programme can be structured and financed in a way that would deliver an increased proportion of affordable homes. And it also included a recommendation to actively consider sale to or joint working with registered providers for potential housing development sites. And finally, on a more parochial note, I'd just like to welcome the commitment in the report to undertake further work to explore options for delivering a housing scheme on the former Askham Bar Park and Ride site, although I do appreciate the reasons why actual delivery may be some years away. I'm also encouraged by the reference in the report to exploring the potential for delivering other community uses as part of the development of that site. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for your comments that we'll consider when we get to agenda item 6. Our third public speaker today is Councillor Pavlovic, who is also registered to speak on agenda item 6, Housing Delivery Programme Update, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I will be speaking on behalf of the Labour group as Labour spokesperson for housing. Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to thank the officers for a wide-ranging and comprehensive report. It's not possible to cover everything in 3 minutes, so I'll focus my comments on the areas that I retain concerns over. Whilst it has been said by this committee on a number of occasions that the council cannot resolve the housing affordability crisis entirely through its own house building programme, and no one disputes that, the argument the Labour group has been making now for several years is that when it does build, that it either maximises the amount of genuinely affordable housing or it partners with registered providers who can deliver it, and who are more likely to retain it than lose it through right to buy. It's therefore positive to see that in both these areas, you have belatedly accepted these proposals. By increasing the proportion of affordable housing on Duncan and Burnholme to 60% and disposing of the site currently occupied by Spark York to a registered provider for 100% affordable housing, albeit on a very small footprint, you are at last recognising that your previous housing delivery programme was fundamentally flawed. However, it cannot be only me who finds it somewhat obscene that we are selling properties on these council-owned sites for an average of £517,000 each, whilst at the same time telling homeless families that they must stay in bed and breakfast accommodation because we have no housing available. Given York's average wage, it is obvious that these homes are at least in good part catering to people outside York rather than existing residents. Whilst we have 1,700 people on the housing waiting list and hundreds in priority need, you say to them and to thousands of other York residents that it's acceptable to sell the new homes we've just built for well in excess of £500,000. The other issue I really must challenge on is that you have not increased the social rent percentage from 20%, but added to the shared ownership percentage instead. For those with no option of buying a home or even a share of a home, it's absolutely vital that development in social rent housing is maximised.
30 seconds left.
Yes, thank you. Our council house stocks go down every year with right to buy losses, not being replaced on a like-to-like basis. It's not a sustainable model in the long term, unless we keep building and replacing these homes. We rely on rents received to invest in improving the existing stock, particularly around energy efficiency and improving insulation. We need to be increasing the social rented properties we build, not lose it. So whilst this report shows some good progress, it's still too slow, it misses the needs of the many, and has at its core a fundamentally flawed premise that it's acceptable for a council to play the part of a private developer. We should be always about the people who need council housing, not the wealthy who don't. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pavlovic, and we'll take your comments into account when we get to agenda item 6. Our fourth and fifth public speakers are both with us in the room, Alexander McCallan and Mark Calvert, who are both registered to speak on agenda item 7, York Minster Precinct Neighbourhood Plan, and that's in support of the document. Happy to hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, committee, and thank you for the opportunity for addressing you today. My name is Alex McCallion. I'm the Director of Works and Precinct at York Minster, and I've led the development of our plan with the York Minster Neighbourhood Forum, and I'm joined by Mark Calvert, our Chair. Since 2018, we have developed a neighbourhood plan which sets out, through policy, how we're going to care for the Minster and its 7-hectare precincts over the next 15 years. It is the first time a neighbourhood plan has been used to map the care of a cathedral or heritage estate. This is exciting, not just for the Neighbourhood Forum, but for the wider city with whom we have worked in partnership. In due course, Historic England, another core partner, would like to use this as a national case of best practice, further cementing York as an exemplar heritage city. We are on the cusp of delivering major change within the precinct with sustainability at its heart. Over 30% of the precinct, which is currently private, will become public, and our first new public park will open in August. The first solar tiles in the precinct will be fitted in May. A planning application for our Centre of Excellence facilities will be submitted next month, putting York on the international map as we partner with institutions around the world. A statue of Her Majesty the Queen is almost complete, representing the very best of the heritage skills we nurture here in York and showcasing our city when it's unveiled in the autumn. Development briefs for Queen Elizabeth Square and our new Discovery Centre are underway. This is a plan for the city and something we should all be proud of.
Yeah, it's a truly community-led document. The forum was established to create a plan which at its core sets a route map for the care of the Minster and the environmental improvement of the precinct for those who live and work within its boundary, but importantly also the wider city. We have been through 4 major public consultations totaling 32 weeks. There have been a total of 683 comments received and 4 iterations of the plan, each time with modifications to the emerging policies. We have genuinely listened to the comments received and made changes where appropriate to do so. The Inspector's report is extremely complimentary and recognises the importance of the document, and the plan has been commended by Historic England's National Advisory Committee, the Cathedral's Fabric Commission for England, and York's Fabric Advisory Committee. So we urge Executive to allow the plan to proceed to referendum. Thank you.
Thank you both very much, and impressively well sticking to your time of 3 minutes, even though there were 2. So thank you for coming, and obviously we'll consider your comments when we take that agenda item later in the meeting. That then moves us on in the agenda to item 5, which is the forward plan. So this is set out on pages 13 to 16. And I'll ask colleagues to accept that in a little bit. Before we do proceed with the main business on the agenda, I just wanted to say a few comments. York has a proud history as a city of sanctuary, and our communities have always shown themselves to be caring and supportive for people in desperate need. And once again, I couldn't be more proud of our city in showing solidarity with the people of Ukraine. Colleagues will know that over the past few weeks, we've seen an outpouring of support amongst residents and communities, including businesses, from donations of food and clothing to officers of accommodation. To help signpost what's going on in the city and to coordinate that support, the Council's created a new webpage where residents can access the latest information on how to best give support. For anybody listening, and we'll include in the minutes, the page is at york.gov.uk/Ukrainian refugee support. And I'd encourage anybody interested to take a look and see how they can best support national and local campaigns, charities and groups who are working to assist refugees and those impacted by the current crisis. In addition to that online resource, I know that York Mix has an excellent live blog on their website, which provides up-to-date information on local events and fundraisers happening in the city. And most recently, York Press has launched their appeal to support the Disasters Emergency Committee's humanitarian efforts in Ukraine. And I'd encourage residents to give to that appeal if they can. Since the events of Putin's war unfolded a few weeks ago, the Council has been in regular contact with Migration Yorkshire to offer York support to those refugees fleeing Ukraine. On Monday, we received a letter from the Home Secretary providing some details on the Homes for Ukraine scheme, which was announced a few days ago. I've asked that a report regarding the Ukraine refugee support in the city be brought forward to a public meeting, and I know that is being added as I speak to the forward plan to go to a decision session of Councillor Smalley to provide more detail to local residents and businesses on the efforts taking place in the city to support refugees during this incredibly difficult period. Thank you. On that, any comments from colleagues with regards to the forward plan? If not, I will ask whether we can accept that. Thank you very much. So I see a consensus in favour of accepting the forward plan. And that then takes us through to agenda item 6, the housing delivery programme update. Tracy, Michael and Sophie are going to be joining us at the table to present the report. And once you're ready, I will hand over to Tracy first.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce this report to you today, setting out the significant progress that's being made on the housing delivery programme. The report sets out the funding to enter into construction contracts on the next 2 sites, being Duncan Barracks and Burnholme, where we will be delivering zero carbon passive house homes whilst increasing the proportion of affordable homes to triple the policy level of 20% up to 60% of affordable homes on both of those sites. We're also progressing the planning permission for a further 85 units on Ordnance Lane, proposing the disposal of the former Reynard's garage site on Piccadilly, specifically for city centre affordable housing, and expanding the current second-hand shared ownership scheme by a further 15 units. The decisions in this report will be adding a further 135 homes to the city's housing stock, of which over 100 of those will be affordable and 117 will be passive house. The report proposes that the former Askham Bar Park and Ride site will remain in the housing delivery programme for future development, but until then we intend to extend the lease with Nimbus Care for the ongoing use as a vaccination centre and health facility. So the decisions set out before executive today will draw down the agreed capital housing revenue account funding commitment, seek permission to apply for Homes England supporting grant funding, agree that disposal of 17 to 21 Piccadilly for affordable housing. But the report also considers the futures of the hugely popular Spark York. This small business pop-up space has delivered beyond expectations on the regeneration of Piccadilly, driving footfall and creating a vibrant community space for all ages. Spark York will now be able to extend the duration of their lease until the site is ready for development. And this will enable us to spend more time to work with them and explore the potential for a move within the city to our largest regeneration site on York Central. And in concluding, can I just also congratulate Michael, Sophie and the whole team who have been shortlisted for the Local Government Chronicle National Award for Excellence for the work done on the housing delivery programme. We're incredibly proud of what we're achieving in this field, and we recommend the report to you, and we are happy to take questions.
Thank you very much for that, and echo your congratulations and thank you on that award nomination. We know a lot of work goes in behind the scenes to get to that point. And open it for any comments and questions from colleagues. I'll go to Councillor Eyre first. I know that Councillor Crackhill would be very disappointed to miss this, but Councillor Eyre, I know she's spoken to you.
Thank you, Chair. I think to paraphrase Stars in Their Eyes, tonight, Matthew, I'm going to be the Exec Member for Finance, Performance, Major Projects, Housing, Community Safety, Economy and Strategic Planning. I think with that remit, since neither of them are there, I can take full credit for the Local Government Award for Housing and also the nomination for the Award for Economy, I think, which was also nominated as well. So I should take the plaudits for both of those in their absence. Obviously, welcome the report coming here today. It's the update on what has always been an incredibly ambitious housing delivery programme, delivering over 600 new homes in the city. And I spoke to officers today. If you look at what our housing plan target is, that represents probably around 10% of all the homes that we need to deliver in the city. So for the local authority to be able to step up and deliver that level, I think is very impressive indeed. It reflects, as officers have alluded to, the delivery that we've already achieved on Lowfield, 60 homes already occupied and 80 should be fully occupied by the end of the year. The sites weren't all mentioned that we are progressing. So Ordnance Lane, as you mentioned, is at planning, and obviously Willow House and York Central progressing through design and feasibility. It's good to see then with this paper that we're adding those 2 additional sites, Burnham and Duncan. Burnham, obviously, very close to my ward and a site that was long neglected and is really finally coming to fruition at the end. We have a fantastic library there. We also have the extra care home that's coming, and that's the final piece of the jigsaw that will really finish that site off and replace something that was a core anchor to the community and has long been missed. As was mentioned as well, we're continuing to increase affordable homes. So we've always committed to trying to achieve that 40% target, double what we require of anybody else in the city. And excellent to see that through careful business planning, we've been able to increase it on these 2 sites for around 60%. And I did notice that paragraph 14 as well, about 150 other affordable homes being brought into the city outside of this particular delivery. And as you mentioned, we continue to tackle climate change by delivering net zero homes on these sites. And I think it's worth noting that some of the comments of the public speaker, that does come at a cost. Passive housing is important for the future, but it is not free and it does add additional cost. And that's something else that's had to be factored into the business planning. And I suppose the final piece of that jigsaw, as you alluded to, is the future phases of that site. So Askham Bar was again one of our other public speakers alluded to, reconfirming our commitment to that as a housing site as it is in the local plan, but obviously something that we're not able to deliver in the immediate short term, and therefore being able to maximise the use of that site, aiding our health partners and making sure that it continues to work for the benefit of the city to the point we're ready to develop that one out, which is the exact same thing that we're doing to 1721 Piccadilly. And I know there's been much debate about potential delays and the time it's taken to get that site forward. I don't think any one of us predicted when we first discussed entering into that lease that we would be entering a global lockdown and unable to do anything for that period of time. So that really has stymied the development on that particular site. Obviously, the work that's been going on in Castle Mills as well, disentangling that to reach what we thought was the best opportunity for how we redevelop that site. And it has become clear that disposal is the correct route. But even that way, we haven't looked at necessarily making the most of our financial asset that, but how we can make the best of that use of that for the city. And again, as the 2 speakers alluded to earlier on, making sure that we're working with our registered providers to deliver hopefully up to 100% affordable homes on that site as a test case we can look to roll out elsewhere. With that, I think the only thing I was going to comment on was the final comments of the public speaker about the cost of the homes. And I think I just had a quick look on page 27 to page 28, which is the business case for delivering these homes. £20 million reliant on market sales to deliver that one. So by my calculation, a quick one, if you want to halve the price of those homes, that's £10 million missing from the delivery of this housing delivery programme. And it wasn't that long ago we were being lectured for taking on too much borrowing and exposing the council to even more borrowing. I suspect even if the housing revenue account could manage to take on an extra £10 million of borrowing, the crippling cost of that across the revenue to the council to deliver that £10 million of additional borrowing would really hit back on our ability to deliver adult social care, to deliver children's social care. So yes, I would love to be able to build homes and sell them at a rate of £200,000 to £250,000, but unfortunately our borrowing capacity isn't there. And if the public speaker does have a solution as to how to bridge that £10 million gap, my door is always open. With that, Chair, I'm happy to approve the recommendations on paragraph 2 on pages 17 to 18, which may actually be longer than my title as executive member for today.
Thank you very much. And again, I'll open it to any other colleagues in case there are any other questions or comments. Councillor Kilbane.
I have a few questions and a comment, Chair. Do you want me to run through the questions all at once? And then I've got some questions for officers and then questions for Councillor Eyre. And thanks for the report. Greatly appreciated. The questions that I've been asked is, what's the cost benefit analysis in terms of building passive houses versus well-insulated houses, sort of A to C on EPC ratings? Could we have got, how many more of those could we have got? The passive houses that are sold on the open market, do we recover the full cost as a developer? When we build the houses that we're going to be socially renting, normally when we build a house, we'd be looking at a 50-year return. Clearly, these will be available for right to buy after 15 years. Is there anything being put in place to try and mitigate that, to stop it happening? As you'll know, with passive houses, one of the main problems with them is failure with the mechanical ventilation and heat reuse systems, because they require quite a lot of occupant intervention and they require quite a lot of maintenance. And obviously, if that fails, then the whole passive house fails. So what are we putting in place to make sure that that doesn't fail, and is that going to be additional cost to us in order to maintain them? And I'll stop there and then come back to questions for Councillor Eyre, if that's okay.
Tracy, Michael, Sophie.
I'm going to ask Sophie to comment on to run through them in order, if that's okay. So on the first one, so the cost benefit analysis of building at passive house standards rather than EPC, you've been doing some calculations on both the carbon cost and the financial cost of that. So do you want to take us through that, Sophie?
Yeah, well, Michael might have to step in as well. He's got some of these numbers to hand. But yeah, so we benchmark our costs. We have cost consultants that work with us, and we're also speaking to other local authorities and registered providers who are building new build homes. I think we're quite pioneering, so others aren't building to our standards, but we can compare those to a new build development without that sort of energy efficiency standards. And we think there's a uplift of about £40,000 per unit per home, and the cost of going in and retrofitting our homes at a future date is probably 60,000 or more, to bring them to net zero carbon at a future date. So we feel that money, although the money is high, it's well spent in the first instance to make sure these homes are future proofed for the foreseeable.
Yeah, so just to add a bit of that, I guess in terms of the benefit, so a passive house typically achieves about a 70% saving on fuel bills for the resident. Because ours is zero carbon, it will take it above that. So more than a 70% reduction in fuel bills. The benefit of certified passive houses that you get a certified product, so you get what you pay for. It gets tested at every stage. You get a very high quality product at the end of it. You will have less issues in years to come. You're buying components that are high quality with long warranties. So your long-term cost is reduced in terms of replacing those component parts. Does that answer all aspects of that question?
No, not really, because I mean, how relevant is the retrofit cost to the uplift in the passive house? Because if you built a well-constructed house now that's of a high energy, not a passive house, but of a high energy rating, you wouldn't be retrofitting that house, would you? You wouldn't be spending an additional £60,000 on it in the years to come.
Well, if you want to achieve zero carbon, yes, you will. It's a future retrofit liability that you're building into your capital programme.
Well, there's more than one way to achieve zero carbon, isn't there? But maybe let's not get into that particular discussion. It depends upon your energy supply too, doesn't it? So, okay, all right, okay. How about the 50-year build and the right to buy?
So, coming on to your second question, which, if I understood it right, was: are we recovering the full cost of the passive houses on the open market sales? Yeah, brief answer to that, yes. We are unapologetic in the fact that the open market sales are subsidising the quality and the volume of affordable housing that we're able to deliver from our HRA investment. Therefore, we are recovering the cost plus the developer profit on those sites to reinvest. So yes. So next question was on the impact of right to buy on the property. So over to you, Michael, to talk about that one.
Yeah, I mean, as you're aware, you can't stop right to buy. It's not something that you can change. It's national legislation. It's something that every authority grapples with. There are mechanisms within that make right to buy more difficult, more prohibitive, and part of that is the level of discount you gets attached to the build cost. So a more significant build cost makes it more difficult to right to buy in the future. So whether you see that as a positive or a negative, these homes will be less likely to be sold under right to buy than a cheaper constructed home.
Thank you very much. I think Councillor Gilbane, you said you had a comment.
No, so there's also the question about the mechanical ventilation and heating systems failing.
Yeah, so Sophie might want to come in on this, but yeah, we started that process a while ago. So our building services team have been embedded in the project. They've been on training courses. They're part of the decision-making process about the components that we're putting in the homes. They're building it into their maintenance programs. We're also working with other authorities and other experts who have been supporting Sophie on her team, understanding what passive houses like to live in, lessons learned, and the things that you need to do in order to maintain a passive house effectively. The most significant being replacing the filter. So the air is filtered, so you either need to replace it or clean it on a regular basis. Other than that, passive house isn't particularly complicated home to live in. It's not technologically heavy. It's just a very well-built property.
Okay, thanks. Just like we always change the filters on our cooker hoods on a regular basis. I don't think I ever have to
be a housing maintenance activity rather than.
Oh, well, it won't be the occupants that do it. It'll be scheduled maintenance that changes.
I'll stop. It's not a conversation.
Yeah. Okay. Just got a few questions for Councillor Eyre, and then a comment, if that's all right, Chair.
If you do those questions and comment together rather than again having a conversation.
So ask the question. Well,
what the comment
is will depend
ask the
upon
questions and give your
is.
comment, because I'm not going to allow a prolonged conversation back and forth.
So sorry, the comment will depend upon what the answers are to the question. So I ask the questions first and then make the comment.
Ask the question if you know what your comment's going to be, or I won't let you comment on Councillor Eyre's response, because we don't need to have a back and forth conversation. So
you won't let me comment on Councillor.
Do your best to do your comment and questions at the same time, because there is no need to go backwards and forwards.
Oh, democracy in action, don't you love it? Okay, so Councillor Eyre, on page 44 of the report, well, page 43 and 44, we see examples of the shared ownership affordability modelling, and you'll see for the scenario 3, a 3-bedroomed house, the lowest deposit that will be needed is £21,250 to buy a 40% share in a house. And I'm just wondering what kind of person do you think that is affordable to? So on what planet is that an affordable deposit for people to be putting down, unless they're relying on the bank of mum and dad? In terms of the whole programme, how do you feel our tenants are feeling who are currently living in appalling conditions in council housing stock when they see this shiny new programme being announced? With reference to Spark, in your negotiations with the operators, did you take into account the concerns of the neighbours? Because we welcome the continuation of the lease on the site with Spark. We think it's brought a lot to the city. However, the concerns of the neighbours must be addressed, and having to do that through the planning system is not ideal, but I'm sure it will take care of it in due course. Looking at the Spark development, did we consider a mixed-use development whereby the council or similar partner operates the ground floor area with social housing operating above? Because the city centre is absolutely desperate for incubator and accelerator space, which is entirely what Spark does. I've also been contacted by residents to whom Spark is one of the few places that they like to go to in the city. It appeals to a particular demographic. I've had young professionals saying to me that if Spark closes, they will leave the city. So maintaining that type of facility on that site that can address the concerns of the residents is something that we'll support. I think York Central is starting to move that away from the area where it's most going to appeal. So was that looked at too? And finally, just to say, as Councillor Pavlovic said, we greatly welcome the increase in the affordable housing on the site, and we look forward to it increasing even further.
Thank you very much. Before I go to Councillor Eyre, I just wondered if officers wanted to pick up, because there's quite a technical set of questions around the scenarios and equally the Spark consultation and development. But before I go across, Tracy.
Certainly. So on the first question of the affordability of that scenario 3, it's worth thinking that's one of the larger houses. It's modelled at 40% purchase as a starting point, giving the deposit of 21 grand. But that is the minimum shared ownership entry point would be just 10%. So it is possible to do that in a whole range of different scenarios where the affordability point shifts for that lowest deposit. And it's modelled on an average household income of 35,000, when actually across York the average income is 40,000. So it's very difficult to present in that modelling an exact scenario where these are averages, and you can choose your affordability point depending on your capital and your income. This is just meant to be indicative. On the point around Spark, we have continued to engage during the operation of Spark across the years with neighbours, and the restraints within the lease have contained some of the difficulties faced by local residents. It is a city centre site. There is always going to be noise surrounding that, but actually the relationships between Spark and the neighbours have improved radically. I would very much agree with Councillor Kilbane that Spark has brought something to the city that we didn't have before, and it will be interesting to see how they might work with the full build out of 17 to 21 as to whether the ground floor uses might become something that becomes a permanent feature. That's not a pop-up, it's a permanent, and we would very much want to establish those relationships between Spark and any prospective purchasers of the site. And then the final point around whether or not we had considered retaining those commercial uses, we don't expect that to be we do think it will be a mixed use site, so there will be commercial uses at ground floor, and we will be in negotiation with the purchaser as to whether that is focused on the kind of Spark model or whether it's on the incubator space, and whether we would retain an interest in operating that as part of our commercial portfolio. We're very open to all of those scenarios.
Thank you very much. Councillor Eyre.
I think that kind of covered everything that I was going to say, other than to echo that I have also personally been in communication with neighbours throughout the process. From the very beginning of the Spark project, I went actually to visit the closest neighbours and have a meeting with all of them at the very beginning, which is what led to the lease changes in the first place. Continue that dialogue throughout this process, even up until this morning. And I've actually had a very good relationship, and they've been very positive about this paper and things going forward there. Obviously, slight concerns about the extension towards the lease, but I've assured them that we're intending to dispose and we are moving forward with that.
Thank you very much. So we have the recommendations in front of us, as Councillor Eyre outlined on pages 17 and 18. If I could please see from colleagues that they're happy to accept those recommendations. So it's a nod or a hand. Thank you very much. So there's a clear consensus in favour of accepting those recommendations. Thank you very much. That then takes us on to agenda item 7, which is the York Minster Precinct Neighbourhood Plan Examiner's Report and Decision Statement. This starts on page 45, and we have Neil and Sophie here with us to introduce this paper. So I'll hand over to Neil first.
Thank you, Chair. I have great pleasure in presenting this report to Executive. As has been highlighted by the Speaker, this is an exemplar neighbourhood plan, the first in the country associated with the Minster, and I can do no more than effectively continue with the examiner's recommendations that we ask you to put this forward for referendum. And I'll just ask Sophie to talk to you through the nature of the referendum, because there's some specific peculiarities associated with the Minster referendum, on the basis that this isn't a parish boundary that we're working to.
Yeah, so this report is being brought to Executive with 3 recommendations for the York Minster Neighbourhood Plan: to agree the examiner's modifications to the plan, to agree that the York Minster proceed to referendum, and to agree the publication of a decision statement confirming these positions. The York Minster Neighbourhood Plan itself seeks to protect and enhance York Minster and its surrounding environment as a cultural and spiritual destination for local and global visitors. The plan itself is structured around 6 policies and 4 project areas. The policies touch on it being a sustainable environment, protecting the historic environment, being a place of well-being, and place where movement is well considered. The 4 project areas are related to Minster Yard and College Green, West Front and Queen Elizabeth Square, the learning and gardens at Old Palace, and properties within the Minster's use. The York Minster Neighbourhood Plan, as we've heard, has been prepared with extensive community engagement over a number of different stages of plan preparation with residents, businesses, and key stakeholders. The York Minster Neighbourhood Plan has also been subject to that independent examination to ensure it meets the basic conditions tests in accordance with regulations, and to ensure that it meets with national and local planning policy. The independent inspector found that the plan was impressive and responded well to specific issues identified during the plan preparation. It provides a clear strategic vision for the area. Officers agree with this assessment. The examiner, in accordance with the examiner's responsibilities, also considered the proposed referendum area. The neighbourhood plan area is not consistent with a parish boundary, and so the geographic boundary for the referendum area required a balanced decision regarding the scope of the referendum area. It was deemed appropriate for the referendum area to include properties outside the neighbourhood area, but in close proximity to the area, to reflect the nature of the consultation that has taken place across the number of years and the scale, nature, and influence of the plan and its policies. Officers agree with the inspector's recommendations. However, it should be noted that a new block of student flats on Hallfield Road in Layerthorpe has the same postcode as one of the as a postcode listed within the examiner's report. This property is geographically located well outside the immediate vicinity of the neighbourhood area. It is considered an anomaly, and consequently, this block of student flats won't be included in the referendum area. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. So I'll open it for questions and comments. Go to Councillor Eyre first.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. I think primarily it's down to me to thank the Neighbourhood Planning Forum. I think these neighbourhood plans are a difficult and often thankless task. I think we will see on the next agenda item the complexity of the mineral and waste plan and the time it's taken to get that through, and the local plan as we are. It's not of the level of complexity of either of those two documents, but the process is very similar and very arduous. I think being able to stick with that has been actually commendable, and it is difficult within these sort of neighbourhood areas that are in the city centre. We're in many ways lucky in the outer areas where you have a parish who are able to come together as a solid base to be able to deliver that one. In those non-parished areas, it's much more challenging to get that sort of form together and build that. So it really is testament to the work we've been able to do to achieve that and get that to the stage that we're at. It has, as the report says, been community-led. There's been positive dialogues with the public, amendments and changes made to that one. And I think we've got a really excellent neighbourhood plan here, and really welcome it going to examination, to referendum is the word. Just that word, I just don't want to say that word ever again in my life. So with that, Chair, happy to move to approve the recommendations at page 45, paragraph 2.
Thank you very much. I'll just check in case there are any other questions from colleagues. If not, as Councillor Eyre has said, we have those recommendations on page 45 and 46, just to echo his thanks for all the work that's gone in to this. And can I please see if colleagues are happy to accept those recommendations? So again, clear consensus in favour of accepting those recommendations. Thank you very much. So that now takes us on to agenda item 8, which is the adoption of the Minerals and Waste Joint Plan. And this starts on page 61. And again, we have Neil, and we'll be joined by John to present this to us. I'll hand over to Neil first.
Thank you, Chair. This is the Joint Minerals and Waste Plan submitted to the Planning Inspectorate in 2017. As Councillor said, these are long and arduous processes, and certainly what I would just like to reflect to members is the comments from Councillor de Gaulle and Councillor Waller at the Local Plan Working Group, because they drew attention to the additional sensitivity thresholds within the Joint Municipal Waste Plan associated with fracking, and that extra 500 metre additional sensitivity threshold effectively covers a significant proportion of the landmass of York and North Yorkshire in that regard. Discussion with the fracking industry was one that effectively caused significant extensions to the process. And as you are aware as a committee, currently fracking is subject to a moratorium nationally, but this plan will effectively provide a planning framework for that activity in our region. The plan has already been considered by North Yorkshire County Council and is currently on display in their local libraries. North Yorkshire Moors National Park will be considering the report this March, and if subject to your approval this evening, this should go on to full council next week and then be presented in our local libraries for consideration by the public as well. I'll just hand over to John to just talk about one or two of the specific sites in the plan that apply to the York municipal area.
Thank you, Neil. Good evening, members. As Neil mentioned there, the purpose of this report is to the purpose of the report is to inform executive of the outcome of the examination into the Mineral Waste Local Plan and the accompanying policies map. It is to provide a recommendation that the authority makes the necessary procedural arrangements to complete the adoption of the process of the plan. As members are aware, the plan was produced jointly by City of York Council, North Yorkshire County Council and North York Moors National Park Authority over a decade or so. The plan was adopted by North Yorkshire County Council on the 16th of February, and obviously we're taking it to full council next week, and North York Moors National Park are taking it also to members in March. The examiner inspector was Ms Elizabeth Ord. She looked at the plan in terms of its soundness. The inspector report was received by the authorities on the 4th of February this year, and her report says that it satisfied all requirements and considered the plan to be sound, subject to main modifications which were recommended as a result of the discussions at the examination in public which took place. Paragraph 10 of the report summarises the key policy changes that the inspectors recommended. If members are minded to adopt the plan, there'll be a 6-week period for a High Court challenge, on the grounds that the document is not within the appropriate power of the local authority and or procedural requirements have not been complied with. So that'll be a 6-week period after adoption. This will include press notices and placing documents in local libraries. The copies of the document itself are on the table over there. Members do want to view them. They were in the link that's in the report. So yeah, if members want to view those, they're over there.
Thank you very much. As you say, we received them in a link to the report, and I know that members of the local plan working group received copies, but I'll just ask now in case any member did want to look at the copies at this stage. Obviously, we could do an adjournment, but hopefully everybody will have looked at those in advance. Thank you very much. So we've got the recommendations in front of us. I'll go to Councillor Eyre first and then open it for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Chair. Very little to add. I think this minimum wage joint plan has been part of my life longer than my children have been part of my life. So I think I reflect back on 2007 when someone asked me if I wanted to be part of the local development framework working group, and I said yes. It's possibly one of the daftest mistakes I ever made as a newly elected councillor. So maybe put that on the induction process. Yeah, I think it is a comprehensive document, and I think the most discussion, as Neil alluded to, was around that fracking, and there was a strong push at that time to make sure we could ensure that wouldn't happen in the city. We were bound by the legal restraints at the time, and we pushed as hard as we could, probably further than we should have done, I think, in many ways. And there was some lively discussions with officers about how far we wanted to push, but we managed to get that buffer zone as to where we wanted, which in effect achieves everything that we could within the regulations that we have. So very pleased to see that as part of this plan, and happy to put forward the recommendations on page 61 at paragraph 2.
Thank you very much. I'll just check in case of any other questions or comments. If not, as you said, the recommendations start on page 61 and run over to page 62. If I could please see from colleagues that they're happy to accept those. So thank you very much. Clear consensus in favour of accepting those recommendations. Thank you very much. That then takes us through to York's 10-year skills strategy, which starts on page 73. And for this item, we're joined by Jamila and Alison in the room. And we also have Lee Probert, Principal of York College, who should be joining us on Zoom. Just to check, Lee, that you can hear us and you're with us.
I can, thank you, Councillor Aston.
Great, thank you very much. I don't know, Joanna, whether you're going first or Lee's going first.
I was going to introduce it and then hand over to Alison and Lee, if that's okay.
Great, thank you.
So this is in essence an update on the York's 10-year skill strategy. We've worked extensively with our partners to make sure that we have residents who have the right skills and businesses are supported to develop that. It works alongside our economic growth strategy to ensure that we carry on thriving and maintain that sustainable growth. So I'm not going to go through it in depth. I'm going to hand it over to Alison and Lee, who've worked on the strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to say, I will focus on the council's key role, as that is one of the recommendations in the paper, is that we continue to be actively involved in that partnership, as well as the ongoing consultation on skills to be part of the emerging economic growth strategy work. But then I'll hand over to Lee to actually talk more broadly about where the strategy sits in terms of kind of that national and regional picture and policy developments, and the more partnership view for city stakeholders. So the strategy document itself is Annex 2, and that was signed off by the Skills and Employment Board, which is that citywide partnership we've mentioned, in September, and subsequently endorsed at Councillor Waller's decision session that same month. The membership of the board is quite broad, and you'll have seen that at Annex 1. And again, I'll let Lee talk a bit more about that. But Lee is chair of that board, and as we may have mentioned, he's also chief executive and principal at York College. So from the council's role and participation in the board, we've managed to afford many opportunities for resident, business, partner and member involvement, not just through decision sessions and commission scrutiny sessions, but also through some of the activity undertaken to develop the evidence base that underpins this strategy. And you'll see some of those examples in paragraphs 33 to 37 if you want more detail. As Jamila said, we actually also worked really hard to ensure that this strategy aligns with emerging strategies, so not just economic growth, but also the adult learning and skills strategy. And you'll see the key part of the community outreach acting as a gateway for upskilling and reskilling the community. So just for clarity, when I say adult learning and skills strategy, that's colleagues in York Learning and the North Yorkshire Adult Learning and Skills Service and their approach to really supporting that community uptake. Also the carbon reduction strategy, and you'll see the read across and the need mentioned here tonight actually about green skills. Our integrated approach, not just across the partnership in the city, but also working across those strategies and engagement in the council, has actually created quite a nice model. And you'll see at paragraphs 22 to 26, an example of our work with the rail sector as one of those priority sectors for inclusive growth in the city. And that just brings me on to the point to say that this strategy isn't all things for all people. It's about supporting inclusive growth through the sum of the partners. So where that partnership approach can have a greater impact to support that inclusive growth in the city. It doesn't mean to say that all of the really good skills work that's already happening and will continue to happen in the city isn't important. It's just that this is where we can put our effort to really make a difference collectively. Lee, would you like to say any more at this point?
Thanks, Alison. I guess just to say something about the structure of the document, and there are 4 core commitments that we've sought to anchor the strategy around. One is a theme about individuals, how are individuals supported within the City of York, and what are their needs, how do we meet those? And that's where we start to think about issues of deprivation, widening access, and so on. There's then what are the needs of employers, what contribution can we make alongside the strategies which Alison has referenced in terms of economic development and so on. There's a third theme which is about the actual offer. So how does the offer that's across the institutions that sit within the city and those that provide skills development outside of the city, but for residents within the city and beyond, to make sure that they're meeting needs. And the fourth theme is about the kind of so what, and we're quite clear, I think, in this strategy, this is not necessarily education for education's sake, that we're really trying to deploy our resources with a view to moving people into employment if they're not already in it, perhaps a change of sector or indeed progression within a sector that they're already in. And then the final point from my perspective is really to amplify the role that the Higher York partners played in wanting to pull together this piece of work. And Higher York, for members of executive who are not familiar, is both universities within the city, Askham Bryan College, York College, and the local authority, represented both at officer level and through Councillor Cuthbertson. And that group really decided that we ought to have a focus on a strategy over a longer period of time. There are a number of drivers for that, which are both about making a positive economic contribution, but also starting to anticipate what the York perspective how we might express a York perspective in emerging issues such as in devolution, such as when the skills and post-16 bill receives royal assent and areas are required to have local skills improvement plans. Our strong sense is that when we get into discussions about, well, what does the devolution of the adult education budget mean for York? What does our contribution to local skills improvement plan look like? That this strategy gives us a clear York voice, not just from a single entity, but from a partnership entity, including those in organisations such as the TUC that represent the voice of employees, as well as representatives of employers and providers within that partnership. And then just before I hand back to the chair, to say that in terms of implementation, alongside the mention in this paper of deploying resources from within the local authority's existing resources for this, the other partners within High York are also committed to making an ongoing financial contribution over the 10-year period to make sure that we don't just have this as a document which we publish and do nothing more with, but to invest in some project implementation resource so that we can both do the things that we've committed to straight away, but also make sure that we keep this strategy up to date, because of course a 10-year time horizon is quite a long time horizon, both in terms of economic planning, but also in terms of skills development and acquisition. And therefore it won't just be able to be a static document once it's published. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamila, Alison and Lee, for that introduction, and I'll open it to colleagues for any questions or comments. Councillor Smalley.
Yes, and I know Councillor Waller will have, I know, is upset, I guess, not to be here to speak, but just to start by thanking everyone involved in bringing this strategy to fruition, and starting, I guess, with the Chair of the Skills and Employment Board, Lee, and thank you for your contribution just then. And thank you to those that responded and were involved in that very extensive consultation, from the 250 businesses to, as Lee's just said, staff, partners within the sector, and many others. I guess as being slightly selfish, drawing people's attention to the evidence on page 109 within the tourism, hospitality, retail and leisure section. I think that reads 100% true to me and reflects conversations I've been having today, but also over the last weekend with hotels in the city, and many other providers across those sectors, because from gymnastics tutors at Burnham Sports Centre through to chefs at the Grand across the road, there have been a massive skills shortage in this sector, and with it being our largest sector, 18%, 200,000 employees in the city, it's something that we really do need to get right. And whilst many of these issues are nationally orientated, as has been said, it's right that the strategy does its bit to ensure we do what we can in the city to ensure the consistent growth of the industry and support those that work in that sector, including through raising wages and working standards. Finally, just to mention with regards to pioneering provision, one of the sectors that Lee has just mentioned, I'd like to just quickly reflect the role of York Learning as the Council's adult education service in this mission, because because from the Roots programme based at Winterscale House through to IT courses at Acombe Library, our brilliant team in York Learning will play an important role in ensuring this strategy comes to life and is delivered in the future years. That's probably it from me, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cuthbertson.
Thank you, Chair. It's quite a delight to be able to read this document again and to note how many useful areas of the economic spectrum are addressed in the proposals in it. Those are not just useful, but vital areas for our city. And it's really good to see some things which at one point we thought might disappear from that list actually figuring here and obviously being of significant benefit to the city. I like the approach which covers inclusive growth, and in particular the fact that High York has been able to input to this strategy, and the institutions involved, including the City Council, of course, will be able to contribute to the different sectors which are envisaged in this report. In particular, the construction skills team at the college and the Institute of Technology, which is also based at the college. I'm looking forward to seeing what they've got to produce. And of course, our two universities and both the colleges together have got a wide-ranging set of skills which are encompassed in this report and which we can hope to benefit. I look forward to seeing partners across the city working on this, implementing this strategy, and in particular to supporting the universities and the colleges in doing that on account of my own portfolio. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Jamila, Alison, Lee, is there anything you'd like to come back on from those comments? And then I'll go to Councillor Kilbane. Lee, there's a nose from the room.
Not from me, Chair. Thank you. Councillor
Kilbane.
Oh, thanks, Chair, and thanks to everybody involved in the development of the strategy. It's really welcome. Some great stuff in there. My question is around the implementation of it, and forgive me if I've missed it somewhere, but I'm wondering who's going to take overall charge of it. So in essence, who's going to manage it? Who's going to make sure that what we say we're going to do, we are going to do in a timely manner, and be making sure that everybody's playing their part and measuring those outcomes, the sort of the who, what, when, where type stuff, because otherwise with large partnerships, with the best will in the world, you can get quite a lot of slippage. So yeah, how are we going to make sure this is implemented in a timely manner and measured against its outcomes?
Thank you. Alison.
I'm going to ask Lee to come in too, because I think it's really important to hear that from a partner. But actually that's the positioning of this paper. So we've recognised that, you know, the really strong partnership approach that we've been working on for over a year now is doing really well, and that needs to evolve. But actually, within our own institutions, we have our own day jobs too. So we need to make sure that this is really at the heart of what we do as an organisation, as a collective partnership, and that as well as working with our own organisations to further the aims of the skills strategy, that partnership and that joint delivery thrives. So what we're actually proposing is a co-funded resource, which Higher York will be considering later this month to do exactly as you've described. So that project management resource that Lee mentioned, to actually ensure that the ways of working that we've adopted are sustainable, which we believe they are. We just need that central point that goes into that shared partnership. And also the important thing you mentioned was measures and the monitoring. Lee, can I bring you in to say a bit more?
Thanks, Alison, and thank you, Councillor Kilbane, for that question. I think there's probably 4 levels that will ensure that we continue to maintain progress in taking this strategy forward. The first is that we are going to retain that partnership skills board with all of the individuals who have contributed thus far. And that's important for 2 reasons, I think. One is to make sure we continue to have plural voices in the ongoing development of the strategy. And the second links to the second way that we'll know it's going to be implemented, is that all of the partners around that table have agreed to endorse the strategy and to include its priorities in their own institutional organisational objectives. The third area to be reassured about in terms of implementation is that the High York partnership, which is the 2 universities, 2 colleges and the City Council, are going to co-invest in some resource to take forward this. So it's not going to belong to any individual institution. We'll retain that sense of partnership in managing that resource going forward. And the fourth area is that each of the those 4 themes that I referred to, whether it's about provision for individuals or empowered employers and so on, are going to be owned by one of those 5 members and continue to be sponsored through that High York partnership, and therefore we'll have accountability at a number of levels, and no doubt we will continue to accept the opportunity to come back to the council's elected democratic structures, whether that's through scrutiny or executive, to provide regular reporting.
Thank you very much. So with that, we have the recommendations in front of us that have been proposed. Can I please see those that are happy to accept those recommendations? So clear consensus in favour of accepting those. Thank you for joining us, Lee. Thank you, Jemima and Alison. So that then takes us on to agenda item 10, which is a request to extend home to school contracts, and it starts on page 1 to 9, and we've got Jamila and we're joined by Barbara at the table.
Okay, so I'll just introduce the paper. Currently, we're looking at recommissioning and redesigning our home to school transport, and it's an opportunity to make sure that we still maintain high quality, safe and value for money services. We know children use transport in 2 ways. One is the taxi service, the other is the bus service. So this paper is specifically in connection with the bus service and looking at how we can ensure that as we redesign, we're taking the right time and opportunity to involve all partners and consult with all partners within this. One of the recommendations in the paper to the executive is to look to an extension of our bus contract, which will enable us to do further consultation. I'm just going to hand over to Barbara so she can talk us through the recommendations.
Thanks, Jamelia. So one of the key reasons that we want to extend the contract is so that we can continue to meet our statutory duties until we can do a review of the Tadcaster bus contracts, because that will be a long lead-in time to do that piece of work. And an extension to the bus contracts means that we can focus the capacity that we have on the re-procurement of the other transport services to make sure they're more cost effective than they are at the moment, and to ensure that we make the necessary savings that have been agreed by the council. There is an option, the paper option 1, to procure all new contracts together, that's coaches and buses, and the taxi services. But to make that happen, we'd have to widen out the existing procurement process which is already underway, and the timescales are really tight to make that happen for the 1st of September. There are risks to option 2, which is actually the preferred option in terms of the rationale and the procurement. However, we're confident that we can withstand scrutiny if there is any challenge coming through. And I should add that Pullman's, they demonstrate cost effectiveness. They're in the top 2% of companies. They've just received an award from the Driver Vehicle Standard Agency. And they've also been benchmarked by an independent consultant as well. And by extending for 2 years, it also means that the market has a chance to stabilise itself more. And so we might have the opportunity for more providers to bid in 2 years' time. So furthermore, if there is an extension, it gives us adequate time to review that Tadcaster bus route, that bus contract, because it is a long lead-in time to make any potential changes. And 2 years would give a reasonable time frame to be able to do that and for public consultation to take place and all of the decision making that goes with that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cuthbertson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This report has been a little while in the making, but the conclusion of focusing on extending the bus contract and then reorganising the arrangements to deal with other transport arrangements is, in my opinion, and in the Directorate's opinion, the right course of action. So I would be urging members to support option 2 and not option 1. One or two questions which I picked on when I read through the paper. First of all, background on page 130, paragraph 2 mentions a question about the contracts currently require all vehicles to be fitted with seatbelts. That has been an issue in the past, but I can confirm that all the vehicles used on Pullman contracts are fitted with seatbelts. And the mention of consultation in paragraph 11 on page 131 refers specifically to the arrangements for transport to Tadcaster. In paragraphs 22 and 24, we speak of emission standards, and it's good to know that the coaches that are provided by Pullman are at a minimum of Euro 5 standards, which is given the contracts and the period during which the current contracts have been enforced is actually a step forward from what was required, because in September 17, I think it was, the specification was for a minimum of Euro 4. So the buses which are likely to be used are Euro 5 and Euro 5 plus, which is a step forward in reducing emissions. There appears to be some duplication between paragraphs 22 and 24, but I'm pleased to say that inquiries of the officers indicate that the basis of any renegotiation of prices will be on CPI unless there were an intermediate rise in fuel costs of a sharp nature, such as we're currently experiencing, and that would have to be negotiated, if you like, in terms of the spot pricing. So with that in mind, Chair, I'm happy to support this and to recognise the amount of work that's been put in at all levels by the officers concerned. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Just check for any other questions, comments. Councillor Kilbane.
Again, and apologies if I've missed something, but are we basically saying that we haven't got time to go out to the open market between now and September to see if we can get a better price on the bus contracts?
I think what we were saying earlier on was that the...
Was there Councillor Cuthbertson? That will go to officers first before I
sorry,
agree. No. I don't mind keenness.
I'm sorry,
I'll come back to you in a second, but I don't know if Joanna or Barbara want to respond first, and then I'll give Councillor Cuthbertson a chance.
It's more about the capacity. It's just myself and a transport manager who are working on the re-procurement at the moment. But we are aware about the Tadcaster bus route, that does need to be looked at, because we need to make sure that's as efficient as it can be. And if there's a different way to make those arrangements, and it does need a lead-in time because there are statutory deadlines around any consultation for any proposed changes that would take time.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Barbara. And I think one of the things that we did look at when we're looking to redesign and reprocure is about making sure that we redesign in a safe way. So the initial phase is around the taxi service, but much more than the capacity is around the consultation and co-production. I'm a really big fan of consultation and co-production. A lot of our young children use our buses as their transportation. We have a good provider in the place at the moment, and it's two things. One, we need to develop a market around buses and coaches, so we have a thriving market and the ability for then other providers to actually tender for service. If we went out in September, we'd probably get the same bus company doing the tender because it's such a large amount of travel for young people. But that 2 years will give us a real time to one, enhance the market, but two, do the consultation and co-production that this deserves.
Councillor Cuthbertson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Despite my earlier keenness, I have nothing to add to what the officers have just said.
Thank you, but Neil does.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to say that clearly part of the service area, my colleagues supervise the city's transport network, and we've worked with colleagues in education just to assist them in terms of benchmarking for the work being undertaken by York Pullman, and they've confirmed to myself and to Jamelia that the pricing is consistent with our understanding of the cost base associated with bus services. And now, as a named party on our council's O licence, which is the operation of HGV vehicles, I can say that the DVSA earned recognition status that's highlighted in Chapter 9, just to reassure Councillor Kilbane, is a very high standard to achieve. It's something we're working forward to as a council to achieve it, and it is a very high standard. So to go with an operator that has got that level of care and attention to the management of their fleet, I think is a recommendation to the quality. I clearly can't comment on the procurement process, that's education colleagues to look at that, but just in terms of reassurance of value for money and quality, that I can give that from an operational perspective from place.
Thank you very much. So we have the recommendation in front of us for option 2 on page 129. If I could please see from colleagues if they're happy to accept that recommendation, so it's clear consensus in favour of accepting that. Thank you very much. We now move on to, I think, urgent business, and as far as I'm aware, I just checked, Fiona is not nodding at me, so there is no urgent business today. So just to thank everybody for watching, joining, or taking part in the executive meeting, and we'll see you all at the next one. Thank you.